In this demo scenario, we're going to talk about deploy anywhere. For this, we're going to deploy two applications. We're going to deploy our e-commerce application to our cloud servers in AKS and EKS, and we're going to deploy our warehouse application to our edge server based in our warehouse. So what we're going to do is start with our dashboard here. And the first thing we're going to do is add our edge cluster. So currently we have our 4 servers. We've got our EKS, our AKS, our production, and our smoke test servers here. So let's add a new cluster. Now we have an option to connect with build a cluster and connect. Today we're going to connect to a live cluster that's already deployed. So let's click next. So this is going to be our Ireland warehouse server. So we'll pop in our description here. And then let's select our cluster type, which is going to be a K3S in this circumstance. This is going to be our production environment, and our infrastructure type is going to be edge. So then what we've got is two options. We can connect with kubeconfig, which is what we're going to do today. We can also join with the kubectl, which will give you a command at the end to execute on the server. So with the kubeconfig, I'm just going to click upload. And this is going to bring me up a little menu. And I'm just going to go into my demo folder here and upload my kubeconfig file. So with that, I'll click next. We've got the option to associate this cluster with a group at this point, but we're not going to do that because we're going to create a group and add this server in just a moment. So let's just create the cluster for now. This is going to take a few moments while it installs the agent on the back end, and then the server's going to come up. But for the moment, it'll show unhealthy. While we're waiting for this to come up, let's take a quick look at cluster groups. So what I have here is a pre-built one called my shop prod, which contains my 2 production servers, and we're going to deploy simultaneously to both of these later. For now, let's create a new group. Let's call this all clusters. This is going to be all Kubernetes clusters. And what we're going to do is select all of the items that we have here in a group. Now, this can be handy if you want to do, if you've got a standard set of items that you want to deploy on all of your clusters as a baseline. So let's create that here. And then what we're also going to create as a group is we're going to create another group that's just going to contain our warehouse clusters. So the reason for this is because if we deploy to a group here as opposed to a cluster, then in the future, any DevOps pipelines that we've got that target a deployment that's accessing a group, we don't need to make any changes to our actual pipeline. We can just add our additional clusters into this warehouse group, and they'll inherit all the deployments that are all ready for that group. So let's create that one. As I said, right, we can see our cluster is now actually popped up and healthy while we've been busy creating those groups. And we can see here, if we pop back into groups, that we have our all clusters, which has 5 members, our shop production, which has 2, and our warehouse, which has 1. So let's look at the remaining items that we need to do to build up an application. So first thing I need is my application source, which is going to be my repository. And let's create a new repository. In this case, we're going to select Git and GitHub. And this is going to be our warehouse repository. I'm just going to copy my URL for my demo here. And we'll just paste our repository URL in here. And optionally, if we have any credentials, we can select and attach a credential here. So with that said, let's connect. We can see we have our repositories, we now have our warehouse, and we have our web shop. Now, we also have image registries here under application source, which I'm not going to demonstrate today. But here we can select any private registries. So whether we've got ECR, ACR, Harbor, GCR, Docker Hub, or a custom registry, we can set up the registry here and credentials, and this will get pushed out to the clusters and allow them to access the private registries and pull down any private images as opposed to public Docker Hub images. So we'll come across to our applications. As you can see, we've got 2 configured here. So let's configure a new application. And this is going to be our warehouse application. So we pop in our name and description, and then we click Next Steps. So now we select our registry. In this case, we want to select our warehouse. We want to select our branch, and this is going to be our default branch. Now, this can be overridden in the deployment, and we'll select our default namespace, which in this case, we're going to pop as warehouse. Finally, we need to choose whether you're going to use manifest or Helm. So I'm going to choose manifest at this point. I'm just going to get the location of my manifest, and I'm just going to paste that in to the path. And now we can select a cluster to be deployed on immediately, but for now, let's just create an application. So let's go back. So now we can see from our dashboard, we have 5 clusters. We have a single deployment currently. Our schedules are still 1. If we come down here, right at the bottom on our clusters, we can see our island warehouse and we can see our warehouse application. So let's go into our deployment lists on the left-hand side. And let's select a new deployment. And what we're going to do now is set our deployment name. So this is going to be our warehouse deployment. And our application is going to be our warehouse. And we can override the namespace and branch here if we so choose. I'm just going to enter the same details just to show you how it works. So we've got our warehouse and our main branch. I'll just click Next Step. So again, here now we have the cluster or group. So we've got the choice. We can either deploy directly to our island warehouse, or we can deploy to our warehouse group. And like I said, our choice would be to deploy to our warehouse group, because in the end, we can then add additional service to this should we need. If we've got a single server, it doesn't harm it. It will just allow us to have more flexibility and future-proof the deployment. So if I click Next Step, we've then got the recommended actions. You'll notice these are the same actions that we had from the AB deployment. So if you need a refresher, please refer back to that scenario. So finally, let's take a look at our island server web page here. As we can see, we have no deployment currently. We're seeing a 404. And let's create that and let's that happen. And now the system will go out in the background and will deploy that for us. So we'll give that a moment. Let's just check. And we can see that our warehouse is now deployed and we can see our page there. So now let's move on to a simultaneous deployment and let's deploy our web shop. And what we're going to do is deploy our web shop to our AKS and EKS server. So as we're still in our deployment page here, let's click New Deployment. And for this, we're going to deploy our web shop with our name. And this is going to be our web shop deployment in our description. For our application, let's select our web shop this time. Again, we can override the namespace and branch. Let's just leave those blank to accept the default this time. And we'll select our shop prod group this time and click Next. Once again, we have the add-ons option, and then we'll create the deployment. Now let's go back to deployments. So what we can see now, if we view, is we can start to see our deployments coming up. We can see the state of our clusters. Let's just take a quick look at our servers. And we can see our application on EKS. We can see our application deployed on AKS. And if we return to our dashboard, we can now see our clusters and our deployments that we've now succeeded. And that concludes our demo on Deploy Anywhere. Thank you for watching this demo, and I hope it was useful in giving you a good sense of how CAEPE helps developers and teams be more efficient and effective when it comes to deploying applications on Kubernetes. For more resources on CAEPE, visit caepe.sh/start-here or book a meeting with our experts through the email address shown on screen.